A wealthy judge forced his own daughter to marry a poor cowboy, just to punish her for being too fat and embarrassing the family. But that cruel decision unraveled a shocking family secret that could destroy everything he built. If this hooked you, hit like, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. And keep listening, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The grand hall of the Whitmore estate sparkled with oil lamps and glimmering chandeliers, but the light felt cold and mocking. The golden walls and polished hardwood floors didn't warm the space. They reflected only the harsh expectations of old money and social standing. It was the annual Founders' Ball, a night of false smiles, stiff corsets, and carefully curated lies. In the middle of all that staged perfection stood her, Miss Clara Whitmore, daughter of Judge Augustus Whitmore, granddaughter of war heroes, and heiress to a powerful name. But Clara didn't fit the mold. Her gowns were always custom-made, wide at the waist, stitched with timid little daisies, as if trying to hide rather than highlight her. Her thick, dark hair was braided neatly with subtle ribbons, and though her face held a quiet beauty, most never looked past her full figure, too much for their narrow eyes to accept. That night, Clara walked the ballroom with her shoulders straight, each step carefully measured. She felt the stares, heard the muffled laughter, knew exactly what they whispered. But she didn't let it show. Not until she heard him. A group of young gentlemen stood near the ornate punch table, laughing too loud. Among them was Nathan Caldwell, the very man her father had hinted might be a suitable match. One of his companions grinned and teased. "Heard the judge wants you paired up with Miss Clara." Nathan smirked, loud enough for all to hear. "Marry her? Sure, if I need someone to haul lumber or shield me from bullets. With that size, I'd be safer than in a fort." The laughter erupted like gunfire. Clara was just a few feet away. She froze, pretended not to hear, but her chest tightened, eyes welled up, and something inside her crumbled. The room kept spinning in laughter and dance, but for Clara, everything went still. Across the hall, her father stood watching. He didn't intervene, didn't speak. He turned away, as though she were invisible. That night, Clara didn't dance. She waited until she could retreat to her room, rip off the tight satin dress, untwist her braids, and stare into the oval mirror she'd had since childhood. Her fingers traced her face slowly, the gentle curve of her cheeks, the strength in her jawline, the softness of her hands. She didn't hate herself, but it felt like the world had made it its mission to teach her how to. By morning, she was summoned to the formal sitting room. Her father sat tall and cold in a high-backed leather chair, flanked by advisors and the family housekeeper. His face, a mask of stern control. "Clara," he said with no warmth, "some decisions must be made with a cold mind. You haven't brought pride to this family, but perhaps you can still serve some use." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The governor wants to reward a man for service. He saved a marshal's life during a border raid. He's a ranch hand, a cowboy, and the reward he's to receive is a woman." Clara's blood froze. "What does that have to do with me?" The judge finally looked her in the eye. "You are the reward." Her world shattered. "Is this some kind of punishment?" she whispered. "It's fate," he replied, devoid of any fatherly feeling. That afternoon, Clara didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. She returned to her room, pulled out the red ribbon her mother once wore before passing, and tied it in her hair. Her life had been traded like a sack of grain, but she would leave with her head held high. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the plains, Clara was taken to the far edge of county land. A lone cabin waited, stone and timber, worn but upright. And standing out front was Jesse, tall, steady, skin sun-darkened, eyes deep and calm. He didn't speak much, didn't sneer, didn't flinch. As Clara stepped down from the carriage, bracing for humiliation, Jesse simply tipped his hat and said, "Welcome." Just one word. But in that quiet, something cracked open inside her. A new beginning, one she never expected. The wagon rolled away before the dust even settled. No goodbyes, no tears, no hand to wave her off. Clara stood there, motionless, her boots sinking slightly into the dry, dusty trail beneath her. Her beige cotton dress, plain and hand-stitched, shifted gently with the prairie breeze, which carried with it the scent of old timber and smoldered leaves. Above her, the sky hung heavy with storm clouds, like it was holding back tears that the world refused to cry. Before her stood a modest little cabin, dark stone walls, a clay roof, narrow windows, and a worn wooden door weathered by time. A simple clothesline swayed with white linens, and nearby, bunches of dried wildflowers hung upside down, releasing a scent both earthy and unexpectedly tender. She hadn't known what to expect, but whatever she imagined, it wasn't this. The place was humble, sure, but every stone seemed carefully placed, every corner tended to with quiet pride. It didn't boast wealth, but it whispered of dignity. Then he appeared, Jesse. He stepped out from the cabin holding a small bundle of firewood in his arms. He wore a faded cotton shirt, trousers tied at the waist with a strip of old rope, and his bare feet were stained from years of soil and labor. His skin, dark and weather-worn like an old oak tree, framed eyes that were steady, unsettlingly calm. He looked her over, not with mockery or judgment, but with quiet curiosity, like a man testing the wind before moving forward. Then he said, "This house is yours too, if you want to come in." No sarcasm, no condescension, just an open door. Clara hesitated, her heartbeat rattling against her ribs like a caged bird. She took a breath. Then she walked. Each step felt like defiance, a reminder that this wasn't her choice, but here she was. As she crossed the threshold, the scent of firewood, dried herbs, and something baking, maybe cornbread, maybe tubers, wrapped around her. The inside was divided into two small rooms. The front held a wooden table with two mismatched chairs, a bench draped with striped fabric, shelves of clay jars, and a woven mat rolled up in the corner. The other room had a small cot with dark blankets and a locked chest beside it. "You can sleep there," Jesse said, pointing to the smaller room. Clara nodded, unable to find her voice. Jesse returned to the stove. With quiet, practiced movements, he lit the fire and brewed an herbal tea from a tin. The only sound was the soft bubbling of water. "You hungry?" he asked without looking at her. Clara opened her mouth, paused, then closed it again. Finally, she said, "I'm not sure." Jesse set down a plate, just some warm bread and roasted roots, before stepping away without taking a seat. Clara sat down, ate slowly. The food was plain, but it was cooked with care. That, more than anything, unsettled her. She had braced for disdain, for indifference, maybe even cruelty. Instead, she found space, room to simply exist. That night, Clara lay awake in the cot, listening to the wind tapping against the walls. From the other room came Jesse's footsteps, soft, unhurried. No approach, no unnecessary words, just silence. She pulled the blanket tight against her chest and remembered her father's words. A piece of trade. And yet here she was, in a stranger's house, beside a man who saw her but didn't try to take her, who noticed her but didn't judge. In the middle of the night, she woke to the sound of rain. It danced on the clay roof like fingers drumming softly. Clara rose quietly and went to the window. Outside, lit by the lantern glow, Jesse sat on the porch, staring into the dark like he was speaking to it. She stood there, watching him, unmoving. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something else, something that felt new and unsteady. As if, for the first time, someone saw her as a person, not a burden, not a disgrace, not a punishment, but a presence. She returned to the cot, shut her eyes tight and thought, if he doesn't hate me, why does this hurt so much? Jesse's silence was like a mirror, and within it, Clara saw all the cracks she had tried to hide. But here, in a cowboy's quiet home, the seed of a different story had been planted. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't just what others said she was. The night air felt thick, almost like velvet, stretching across the world. Crickets chirped in the distance, broken only by the occasional groan of wood in the stove, still holding on to a last ember. The little house slept, but Clara didn't. She lay on the rough mattress still, but her mind spun, her pride a dull throb. The sheet clung to her damp skin. The thoughts came fast. How could this man, this poor cowboy, treat her with more respect than her own blood ever had? How could his silence hold more meaning than all the words she'd ever been told? It was like he saw something she herself had tried to bury. That night, she rose without a sound. The cold floor met her bare feet like ice. She grabbed the shawl hanging by the door. She slowly pushed open the side door at the back of the cabin. Outside, the wind cut like a blade, sharp and dry. Darkness wrapped around everything with an ancient weight. The trees whispered overhead, restless. The dirt path, still damp from earlier rain, crunched beneath her bare feet. But she didn't look back. She walked. First slow, then quicker. Her hands trembled. The shawl slipped off one shoulder. Cold slipped through the seams of her dress, but she kept going, like she wasn't just running from a place, but from herself. The muddy trail led to an old hunting path, framed by twisted trees, where moonlight barely reached the ground. The sounds of owls, rustling branches, and small creatures created a tense, haunting chorus. Still, she didn't stop. Clara ran from a kindness she didn't understand, ran from the reflection she'd seen in that cabin mirror, ran from the echoes of snickering men in polished boots, and from the quiet certainty in Jesse's eyes. And then the world collapsed around her. A loose branch underfoot, a sudden slip, the thud of her body hitting wet earth. Mud clung to her dress. Her head struck stone, a dull crack. The sky twisted. The night spun. Then, blackness. When her eyes opened again, the world was hazy. She smelled wet dirt, dried blood, and wood smoke. Her forehead throbbed, her arms ached, but she felt warmth against her skin. Someone was carrying her. Jesse. His arms were strong, his face tense and slick with sweat and mud, but in his eyes, relief. They reached the cabin. He laid her gently on the cot, pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. The water was warm, the gesture tender. Clara's soul trembled more than her body. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Jesse looked down at her, eyes deep and worn but full. "Because you were given to me," he said quietly, "and I won't dishonor what life hands me with grace." She turned her face away, tears slipping without permission. He left the room, then returned moments later with another cloth, a small bowl of mashed roots and honey. He fed her in silence, steady and patient, like he was caring for something rare. In the days that followed, Clara grew weak. Fever set in. Chills came and went. But Jesse was always nearby, changing cloths, cooking stews, whispering old words in a language she didn't know. And with every quiet gesture, a little wall inside her crumbled. Children from a nearby homestead left wild flowers on the windowsill. An old man dropped off a handmade quilt. A woman she didn't know brought a jar of sweet pumpkin preserve. Even as she lay recovering, Clara began to notice this harsh world outside. It still had people who knew how to care. One morning, she woke to find a small wooden carving placed on the table beside her bed. It was a figure of a woman, eyes closed, hands over her heart, and beneath it, carved in rough script, big body, bigger soul. Clara cried, not because she was in pain, but because no one had ever spoken to her like that, because the real medicine wasn't the tea or rest. It was this, being seen. And maybe, just maybe, this was what love looked like at the very beginning. Time moved slowly in the stone cabin, like the clock had given up on its race. Everything danced to the rhythm of the wind, the crackle of firewood, and the morning songs of prairie birds. Clara woke each day with sunlight warming her cheeks before she even opened her eyes. It was a different kind of waking, one with no shouting, no commands, no rush. Just the smell of roasted corn coffee from the kitchen and the sound of kindling being stoked. Jesse was always up before her. Always. He moved quietly, never raised his voice, yet filled the house with his calm. Like a tree, grounded, quiet, alive. He cooked with focus, patched his own shirts, arranged dried herbs in neat bundles that hung by the windows. When he crossed paths with Clara in the hallway, he would simply say, "Did you sleep all right?" She'd nod, still unsure how to reply to that kind of gentleness. That first week, Clara just watched. She came from a world of velvet curtains, cold parlors, and servants who avoided her gaze. Now she saw beauty in the packed dirt floor, in the whistle of the kettle, in the way Jesse washed his hands before picking beans. Simplicity wasn't ugly, it was clean, honest. As the days passed, Clara began rising earlier. She folded her own blanket, swept the porch, tried to learn how to bundle the herbs herself, clumsy at first. Jesse watched from a distance. He never corrected her, just offered a soft grin. "You've got good hands," he said one day. She paused, caught off guard. No one had ever complimented her hands before. Folks usually called them too big, too rough, too much of everything. But in that simple sentence, there was something she hadn't felt in years: recognition. That evening, Clara sat on the porch bench for hours, watching the sky shift its colors like a quiet theater. The blue melted into gold, then lilac, then a deep blanket of stars. In the distance, children from the nearby settlement chased wooden hoops across the dusty prairie. One girl, with short braids and curious eyes, wandered closer. "You're the lady who lives with the strong man, right?" she asked, wide-eyed. Clara chuckled. "I belong to no one." "But he looks at you like you do." Clara didn't answer, but the girl's words rang inside her like an old church bell, one you forgot still worked. The next day, something inside her shifted. Jesse was out in the back field planting roots when Clara approached him, holding a small basket filled with clothes she had mended. She'd spent the whole afternoon sewing, alone, something she hadn't done in years. "I made this," she said softly, showing him a patched-up shirt. Jesse held it in his hands, examining the uneven but steady stitches. "You did it with heart," he said. She looked down, cheeks warm, unable to speak. That night, Jessie stirred the embers while Clara brewed lemon tea with a stick of cinnamon bark she'd found in the pantry. They sat side by side, not touching, but breathing in sync. The silence no longer felt heavy. It had become comfort. Later, when Clara returned to her room, she found something resting on her pillow. A small dried wildflower, tied with a piece of red thread. Beside it, a folded scrap of paper. In rough handwriting it read, "Sometimes beauty doesn't need applause, only space to bloom." She clutched the note to her chest. Tears slipped down her cheeks. For the first time, she wasn't crying from hurt. She was crying because someone had truly seen her, not as the judge's big, burdensome daughter, not as a bartered prize, but as a woman, whole, present, enough. From that day on, Clara began helping Jessie more, planting side by side, gathering roots, scrubbing linens by the river, laughing with the town's children. She learned how to make lye soap from ashes, how to read the sky for signs of rain, how to name wild herbs by scent. And slowly, without even realizing it, she started to recognize herself, not as something to be hidden, but as someone who belonged in the world, even if the world had once said she didn't. The stone cabin, so small from the outside, became a true home inside her, and the simplicity, once foreign, now felt like the richest thing she'd ever known. It was late afternoon when the sky turned a deep golden hue, like the sun was whispering one last secret before nightfall. Clara pulled linens from the line, folding each piece with gentle hands. The scent of herbal soap lingered in the fabric, blending with the smell of damp earth and warm prairie breeze. Jessie was off helping an old rancher mend a busted fence. She was alone, but for the first time, didn't feel lonely. The house seemed to hum softly in her presence. As she placed the folded cloths into a small wooden chest tucked beside the bedroom wall, something caught her eye. A gap. The back panel of the chest didn't sit flush with the wall. Curious, Clara leaned in and gave it a push. The wood groaned, then shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, a dark leather box, dusty and tied with a red cord. Her heart raced. This wasn't just some forgotten trinket. It felt like it held part of something bigger, something she wasn't ready for, but needed to see. She sat cross-legged on the woven rug, the box in her lap, hands trembling as she untied the cord. Inside lay a delicate watercolor portrait. A young woman with dark hair, soft eyes, and a serene smile. Around her neck hung a pendant with a red stone, identical to one Clara remembered seeing years ago on a relative's neck. She turned the painting over. Faded script read, "To my love, yours, Isadora." Time froze. Isadora Whitmore, her cousin, daughter of her mother's sister, a woman who had vanished years ago after a scandal no one ever dared to speak of. Clara held the portrait against her chest. The pieces were beginning to fit. The way Jessie had looked at her that first day, with hesitation, with recognition, the tenderness, the sacred silence. He hadn't just seen Clara. He had seen someone he once loved, truly loved. That night, Clara waited by the hearth, the portrait beside her. When Jessie returned, shirt stained with dust, shoulders tired, she didn't speak at first. She just handed him the painting. He froze. His body tensed. His eyes lingered on the image for what felt like forever. His hand hesitated before taking it. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Behind the chest. It wasn't hidden from me. It was hidden from the world." Jessie sat down across from her. The fire between them crackled, casting shadows across their faces. "She loved me," he said finally. And I loved her. She chose me when no one else would have dared. I was free back then, working as a messenger for the governor. But her father, your uncle, found out. Clara said nothing. Each word was both a blade and a balm. He had me arrested, Jesse said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before the sun even came up, I'd been sold like livestock. They claimed she'd been sent east, died of fever. But I never got the truth. His eyes shimmered, not with anger, but something deeper. Grief. And now here you are, he added, looking at Clara. Her kin, same eyes, same fire. When you showed up at that cabin, I thought maybe it was fate being cruel again. A punishment. But now, I see it was a beginning. Clara could hardly breathe. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't want you to think I saw her when I looked at you. You're not a shadow of the past. You're your own. But how could you not love someone who reminds you of what was taken? She asked, her voice shaking. His words came back steady, not manipulative, not pleading, just truth. I do. I can't help it. Clara stood slowly, stepped toward him, her eyes locked onto his. So you care for me because of who she was? He nodded. And because I want to love again, if you'll let me. She didn't speak. She just sat beside him, leaned her head on his shoulder. And there, between the memory of someone lost and the quiet warmth growing inside her, Clara finally understood. Not every woman is loved for her beauty. Some are loved for the story they carry. And for the first time, she felt her story was just beginning. That night, the sky above the plains seemed empty of stars, as if the heavens themselves had gone quiet just to hear what Clara's heart hadn't yet found the words to say. She walked barefoot across the creaky floor of the small cabin, her skin chilled by the raw wood beneath her. Isadora's portrait still sat on the table, lit only by the flicker of a dying lantern. Its flame danced uncertainly, mirroring her own confusion. She knew Jesse loved her. That wasn't in question. But what gnawed at her chest was knowing he had once loved someone else, someone with her same blood. It was impossible not to feel like a stand-in, a ghost, a second act. Part of her wanted to run, disappear, scream. The other part wanted to stay, to feel, to believe. That's when he appeared at the door, shirt still open from field work, sweat on his skin, eyes watchful. "Can I come in?" he asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't tell him no either. He walked in slowly and sat on the wooden bench across the room. He didn't come closer, didn't raise his voice, just let out a breath. The silence between them filled the air, thick but not empty. The kind of silence that holds everything words can't. Finally, Clara spoke. "Do you see me, or just what you lost?" Jesse looked down, then lifted his gaze, calm and unflinching. "I saw what I lost when you first arrived, but since then, I've started to see what I might gain if I'm brave enough to feel again." Clara narrowed her eyes. "And are you?" "Not yet," he answered, without hesitation. "Because I can't feel what you won't let me offer." His words weren't accusations. They were honest, and somehow that made them land even harder. Clara slid closer to the fire, settling onto the floor. They sat together in the quiet, the flames casting soft shadows on the walls. After a moment, she asked softly, "You never touched me. Not when I was sick, not when I fell asleep next to you on the porch. Why?" Jesse leaned forward, hands folded loosely over his knees. "Because love, Miss Clara, ain't hunger. It's time, it's space, it's listening." She stared at him like hearing a language long forgotten. "But I was given to you, Like property, she said. Her voice cracked. He shut his eyes, like he was holding something heavy in his chest. You're not a thing. You're a person, and I don't touch what ain't freely given. Clara felt her throat tighten. In that moment, she saw it. Jesse was a free man on the inside, even after everything. Even after being chained, stripped of rights. He chose how to love on his terms, with respect. She, who'd spent her life being treated like a burden, a punishment, a mistake, was now being seen as whole, as someone worthy. Her eyes filled. "And if I want to give myself," she whispered. He leaned forward but stopped just inches from her. "Only if it's for now, not for pity, not for the past, not because you feel you owe me, only if it's yours to give." She reached up, fingers trembling, and touched his face. The warmth of his skin, the scratch of his beard, the scent of sun, soil, and wood smoke. A man who lived with honor. "I'm scared," she breathed. A soft smile tugged at his lips. "So am I." And then they leaned their foreheads together. No kiss, no rush. Just skin on skin, breath for breath. And in that space, every doubt became a seed. They weren't lovers, not yet. They weren't a promise, but they were possible. And for Clara, who had been denied even by herself, that was the most powerful kind of love she'd ever known. The next morning, the heavy iron gates of the Whitmore estate groaned open, as if the land itself could feel the weight of who was about to enter. Clara walked through the gardens with steady steps. She wore a dress sewn by her own hands. It was simple, yes, but every stitch carried meaning. Embroidered along the hem were prairie thistle leaves and branches of wild sage. Her hair, braided with a red ribbon, danced in the wind as if to announce she had returned. But not as the same woman. Jesse followed behind her, tall, steady, silent, yet his eyes said everything. Memory, watchfulness, love, held in restraint. The news of Clara's return spread through the Whitmore estate like wildfire. Maids rushed between rooms, advisors murmured in corners, and her sisters, Mary and Lenora, peeked from the stairwell, mouths agape. In the grand parlor, as always, Judge Augustus Whitmore sat waiting. Clad in dark gray, his face was unreadable, sculpted into cold control. Beside him stood his elder brother, Charles Whitmore, the father of Isadora. The alliance was back in full display. The table was set, once again, for deceit. Clara didn't flinch. "I've come for what fear buried," she declared, her voice ringing through the hall like a church bell. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Buried? What are you trying to stir up with this theater?" From her leather bag, Clara pulled out the portrait of Isadora and held it high for all to see. The lamp above the table cast a soft glow across the aged paper. "This is Isadora, your niece, my cousin, the woman who loved this man," she said, motioning to Jesse, and was silenced with cruelty. Charles stood abruptly, his face flushed. "This is nonsense. A long-dead story, meaningless." But Clara stood her ground. "There's value in the love you tried to erase. Value in the child she carried. Value in the man you locked up for refusing to bow his head. And there is value, great value, in the truth." The room fell quiet. She turned to her father. "And you knew it all. You helped sell him like cattle. You signed the papers, sealed the lies, and years later, you handed me to him as punishment. You repeated the same sin, the same cowardice." The judge stood slowly. "I did what was necessary. He was never fit for a woman of Whitmore blood, and you were never fit to carry my name." His words cut across the room like a blade, but Clara didn't blink. "Dignity doesn't live in a name, Father," she said calmly. "It lives in how we act." And in this house, where so many women have been broken to fit a mold, I'm the one who chose to break free." Mary looked away. The housekeeper pressed her lips tight. Even the advisors shifted uncomfortably at that truth laid bare. Clara stepped into the center of the room. Her boots echoed on the cold tile. "I was handed off like an object, but in a house of clay and silence, I found something none of you could give: respect. I was shamed for my body, and yet loved entirely by the man you tried to erase, and failed." Jesse said nothing, but his eyes brimmed with tears. For the first time, someone stood for him, spoke his name like it mattered. Charles raised his voice again. "So what do you want now, girl? Forgiveness?" She looked him dead in the eye. "Number, I want justice. I want this house to remember what it tried to bury. I want it never to feel clean again while pretending Isadora and Jesse were nothing but shadows." Judge Whitmore clenched his jaw. "You don't have the right to raise your voice here." Clara took a breath, lifted her chin. "You're right. I don't." She paused, then said with aching, unwavering strength, "But hear me well, Father. I'm no longer a Whitmore. And thank God, I no longer need to be." The room fell silent as thunder. She reached her hand out to Jesse. He took it, firm, gentle, and together they walked out of the parlor. Outside, the sky had cleared. The moon rose slowly above the plains, bearing witness to a woman who returned not to beg, but to prove that she had survived. Clara didn't need acceptance anymore. She had already chosen who she was, and that woman was free. The next morning dawned with a strange quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but of something sacred waiting to begin. Clara woke with her heart racing. The breeze through the window carried the scent of wild flowers and the faint ringing of a chapel bell from a nearby town. Today was the day she would find Isadora's daughter. The revelation had come 2 days after her return, when the old housekeeper approached her, voice trembling, eyes full of guilt. She confessed that the child hadn't died as claimed. She had been sent to a hidden convent, a place meant to shelter the illegitimate daughters of the court, tucked behind the mountains near the old grist mill. Clara didn't respond with rage, only resolve. She held the woman's hand, steady and sure. Now, riding a small horse beside Jesse, Clara followed the winding trail, crossing sleepy creeks and forests still heavy with dew. The path twisted, but her mission was steady. The convent was modest. Low stone walls, a modest garden patch, and a small wooden chapel weathered by time greeted them as they arrived. Young girls in plain, colorless dresses ran through the hard-packed yard, their eyes bright and brimming with life. A woman in a white veil, Mother Josephine, met them at the gate, her gaze steady and clear. "She's always known she didn't belong here," the woman said, as she led Clara and Jesse down a hallway that smelled of fresh bread and dried prairie flowers. She's always felt different, like her story started somewhere else. Clara stopped in front of a wooden door. Her heart thumped so loudly it seemed to echo through the walls. Slowly, the door creaked open. Sitting on a straw mat, a girl with long chestnut hair read from an old, worn book. Her eyes, those eyes, were Isadora's, but the rest of her face, the nose, the chin, it was like staring into a mirror of Clara's own blood. It was lineage. It was root. "Nayeli," Clara said, her voice breaking. The girl looked up. "Yes?" Clara fell to her knees, tears in her eyes. "You don't know me yet, but I've known you since before you were born." Jesse stepped into the room just after. His face changed the moment he saw her, equal parts wonder, tenderness, and reverence, like finding a long-lost piece of his soul. Mother Josephine stood back, watching quietly. "Are you my mom?" Nayeli asked, almost whispering. Clara smiled gently, her hands pressed to her chest. "No, sweet girl. I'm your cousin. But maybe, if you'd like, I could also be your mother." Nayeli turned her gaze to Jesse. "And him?" Clara looked toward Jesse, who stepped forward and lowered himself to one knee. His eyes shimmered as he gently took the girl's small hand. "I'm the man who loved your mama with everything I had," he said softly, "and who never got the chance to know you." Nayeli looked between them. After a long, quiet moment, she offered the shyest of smiles, like the first bloom of spring. "So, can I have a family now?" Clara didn't hide her tears. "You never stopped having one." On the ride home, Nayeli sat atop a small pony, guided by Clara, while Jesse walked beside them, one hand resting lightly on the reins. The sun bathed them in golden light, and the road no longer felt so rough. Back at the stone cabin, Nayeli explored with curious eyes, touching everything: Jesse's books, Clara's woven blankets, the dried flowers hanging by the window. "Is this home?" she asked. Clara smiled, brushing the girl's hair back gently. "Yes, sweetheart, now more than ever." That night, they ate together, roasted roots, cornbread, and sweet tea. Nayeli giggled at the simplest things, telling stories she'd read at the convent. Jesse listened quietly, eyes locked on her like he wanted to memorize every moment. Before bed, Clara told her the story of her mother, Isadora, with no bitterness, only love. Nayeli fell asleep with her head in Clara's lap, and Jesse sat beside them, softly running his hand through their hair with the tenderness of a man who finally understood where he belonged. That night, Clara looked up at the stars through the window and thought, love isn't just about reunion, it's about rebuilding. For the first time, she felt whole. The once quiet, empty cabin now brimmed with life. Its wooden door had been painted sky blue. Flowers bloomed in hollowed-out gourds across the yard. The scent of handmade herb soap drifted through the breeze. Children ran laughing through the stalks of corn. Women sang old songs as they stitched under the sun. Jesse's old cabin had earned a new name, the Mud Haven, and Clara was the heart that kept it alive. She walked barefoot through the soil, wearing a raw linen dress and a headscarf embroidered by Nayeli. Her eyes no longer searched for approval. They searched for meaning. After finding Nayeli, Clara chose to turn the cabin into something more than a home. It became a place of shelter, a new beginning. She welcomed young women cast out by society for carrying children out of wedlock, orphaned girls from the border wars, forgotten daughters, widows with nowhere to go. Clara offered them refuge, purpose, and dignity. Everyone had a role. Some gathered herbs, others learned to sew, spin, read, and write. The garden grew bigger with each week. The clay oven Jesse had built with the help of the elder women filled the mornings with the smell of fresh bread. Clara taught with calm strength, the kind of voice that grows from deep-rooted love. She didn't just mend fabric, she stitched broken stories. One afternoon, a frail young girl named Leah, whose eyes carried more sorrow than years, approached Clara quietly. "Miss Clara?" she asked, her voice small. "Can I be someone here too?" Clara gently took her hands. Her own hands, once ridiculed, were now strong, steady, commanding without cruelty. "You already are someone," she said with warmth. "You just need someone to remind you." And Leah cried, because no one had ever told her that before. Jessie watched over everything from a quiet distance, not as some heroic figure, but as the steady ground beneath their feet. He did the work that no one saw, mending roofs, planting trees, carving little wooden toys for Nayeli and the other children. And every evening, he and Clara sat together on the porch, saying nothing. The silence now spoke of fullness. Nayeli was growing like the land around her, vibrant, strong, and full of color. She studied from the books Clara had brought back from the convent, sang while scrubbing linens, and learned words in 3 different languages. She called Jessie Hart Grandpa and Clara simply Mama. The same neighbors who once turned their backs now stopped at the gate with warm nods and baskets of seeds, clay, or fresh bread. Some came seeking advice, others brought gifts. All of them echoed the same words. "You've done for us what no judge or landowner ever has." Clara would smile, never out of pride, but because she finally understood. Her nobility was never about blood. It was about what she did with her hands. At the heart of the home, she had Jessie craft a wooden wall, a mural. Upon it, hand-drawn portraits of every woman who had passed through their refuge were displayed. And above them all, carved by Jessie himself, it read, "Where there was no place, we made soil." At night, under the gentle glow of oil lamps, Clara and Nayeli would sit side by side. No fairy tales. Clara told real stories of pain, of survival, of bravery. And Nayeli, eyes wide and bright, once asked, "Mama, why are bad people so afraid of the good ones?" Clara ran her fingers through the girl's hair. "Because the good ones remind them of everything they gave up on." That night, lying in a hammock hand-woven by the women of the house, Clara felt something she'd never known. Not pride, but belonging. She hadn't just been saved. She had become the one doing the saving. And in the heart of every woman who now slept peacefully under her roof, there was a quiet certainty that once someone had seen them, that someone had believed in them, and that someone had a name, Clara. The woman once traded like a punishment, now the root of a new beginning. Time had passed, not hurried, but wise. Clara's hair had silver threads that shimmered under the afternoon sun like flecks of stardust. Her hands, marked by years of labor, were still strong, but they now knew when to rest. Her skin wore the soft marks of a life truly lived. And her eyes, those eyes still burned with fire, only now no longer heavy with pain. It was sunset at the mud haven. The sky painted itself in soft pinks and gold, with clouds like veils drifting lazily overhead. The tall trees swayed as if blessing the land, the very soil where so many stories had taken root. Laughter rang through the air, soft, feminine, full of joy, mingled with the whisper of dry leaves and the low hum of crickets. Clara sat in her straw-woven wooden chair. Next to her, Nayeli, now a young woman, read aloud to a group of girls seated on rugs spread across the packed earth floor. The book was old, bound in thick leather and faded pages, but its words were very much alive. She was given away as punishment, handed over like a sentence, but loved like a queen, Nayeli read, her voice firm and warm. The girls listened in silence, eyes wide, some leaning against each other, others closing their eyes as if memorizing the moment. Nayeli gently closed the book and smiled. "Do you know her name?" she asked. In perfect unison, the girls answered, "Miss Clara." Clara chuckled softly. The sound of it, like old cloth stitched with new joy. She looked down, humbled, still surprised by the path her life had taken. Jesse appeared in the doorway, older now, but still solid, his shoulders broad, eyes dark and shining with the same fire he had in his youth. In his hands was a wooden bowl filled with freshly picked fruit. Nayeli rushed over, wrapped her arms around his waist, and together they disappeared into the kitchen to prepare dinner. Clara stayed on the porch for a moment longer, watching the sunset. She remembered everything: the hall where she was shamed, the wagon that dropped her at Jesse's door, the silence, the fall, the healing, the truth, the lost child, and the woman she chose to become. And she smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. A quiet victory. Clara hadn't conquered the world. She had conquered herself, and that was more than enough. Later that night, under a sky freckled with stars and a hush as sacred as prayer, Nayeli approached her, holding a small candle. "They asked me to name the new garden," she said. "Can I call it Clara's garden?" Clara's eyes welled with tears. "Only if you promise to plant love in it every day." Nayeli nodded. Then, in a gesture that had become part of who they were, Nayeli reached for the hands of the woman who had raised her and whispered, "You chose me, and that's why I'm free." Clara pulled her into a deep embrace, strong and sure, like someone who knew that the most resilient roots are the ones that take hold in mud, right after the storm. Before heading to bed, Clara walked over to the memory wall. One by one, she ran her fingers across the hand-drawn portraits of every woman who had come through their haven. In the center, she placed a new frame. Inside it was the image of Isadora. "You're home now, too," Clara said softly. She stepped back out onto the porch, the cool air wrapping around her. The moon hung full and bright overhead, and there, alone beneath the stars, with nothing but the wind and her story, Clara spoke the words that brought her journey full circle. "I was given away as punishment, but I chose to stay, and in that, I won." Hey friends, if you've stayed with me all the way through Clara's story, thank you. Truly. This isn't just a tale about a woman forced into a life she didn't choose. It's a story about reclaiming worth, about turning pain into purpose. Clara began as someone discarded by her own blood, seen as too much, not enough, or just a means to an end. But through quiet resilience, through kindness that didn't ask for applause, she became something far greater than what anyone expected. She became a sanctuary, for herself, for others, for love. What touched me most is how this story reminds us that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it grows in silence, like wildflowers in muddy soil. Clara didn't fight for revenge. She fought to live with dignity. And in doing so, she gave voice to all the women who've been told they're too loud, too soft, too different, too broken. The mud haven she created wasn't just a place, it was a lesson. That worth isn't something others give you. It's something you uncover when someone, even just one person, looks at you and says, "You matter. You belong." If this story made you feel something, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're listening from, or share your thoughts about Clara's journey. Have you ever felt unseen? Have you ever been the one to see someone else? I read every word you write, and it means the world to connect with you. And hey, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, because out there are still so many Claras, and together we can make sure their stories are heard. See you in the next one.